The Eagles just dominated a dynastic opponent in the Super Bowl and kept them from achieving history. And there's a thing or two about how the Colts can learn from how this Eagles team was put together. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. What is up, everybody? This is Jake Arthur of HorseshoeHuddle.com, your resident credentialed media member for the site. And happy post-Super Bowl Monday to everybody. Hope you guys are recovering nicely. Obviously, hopefully better than Chiefs fans and Chiefs Kingdom is today. Wow. Eagles just laid it down on the Chiefs last night, 40-22 in the Super Bowl. And I don't know that any of us saw this coming outside of Philadelphia. I certainly thought there was an avenue for them to win, but certainly not in that fashion. Anyone who asked me how I thought the game was going to go, I said I thought the Eagles were more talented, but the Chiefs are hard to beat in a Super Bowl. And ultimately, I thought that would somehow make some sort of magical difference that the Chiefs would win. But wow, 40-22. At no time were the Chiefs in control of this thing. Early, the tone was kind of set, we thought, with that bogus OPI call against A.J. Brown. Everyone kind of thought, oh, here we go again. This is how it's going to go. But no, from there, it was all Eagles all the time. And how does that relate to the Colts? Well, let's go ahead and talk about it. I want to get into how this Eagles team was put together and how they rebounded so quickly from their Super Bowl loss a couple years ago to where they are now, to winning in dominant fashion. One of the best defensive performances we've ever seen in a Super Bowl. So defensively, how it looks offensively, it's probably a little more attainable for the Colts in the short term. Maybe not to look exactly like that, but the offense doesn't necessarily need as much work as that defense does. But overall, I want to look at how the Eagles got here and how it kind of compares to the Colts and how the roster and this whole thing was constructed. And, when I look at this thing, I look at the job that Eagles GM Howie Roseman has done, and I say this guy is intentional about improving, and there's just really no complacency there. Chris Ballard already admitted this fault of his after his postseason press conference back in January, that he cares a lot. He's emotional and gets really attached to some of these players, and he's let that affect the way that the roster is constructed. And you just can't do that. There's going to be homegrown players, like mid-round guys that are really good, and you want to reward them ascending to startable players. But your roster just can't be made up of good stories, basically. You need difference makers in there. And, from the coaching staff to players, important players included, the Eagles have made necessary moves to get better. If you look at this time last year, Brian Johnson was the offensive coordinator. Defensive coordinator was Sean Desai. And then after that, they had to move on to Matt Patricia for a portion of the year. This year is Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio. An incredible glow up, basically. Kellen Moore is probably about to go be the head coach of the Saints, and Vic Fangio is one of the more renowned defensive coordinators that we've seen of the last 15, 20 years. The guy is well documented as one of the best defensive coordinators. So starting with the coaching staff, they were intentional about getting better. They're active in free agency, not just re-signing their own. They do a lot of 1, 2, 3-year deals like the Colts like to do, just short-term deals. But they're willing to get guys in and out quickly. They'll bring guys in that they really liked and be willing to part with them just a year or so later. You look at guys they've really liked that they had to let go of at some point. And some of these are even guys they just had initially brought in. TJ Edwards, Javon Hargrave, Miles Sanders, Isaac Sumalo, Boston Scott, Kez Watkins, DeAndre Swift, CJ Gardner-Johnson. Some of them are, homegrown guys, guys that really flourish with them. Now, you look at like a Gardner Johnson, that's someone they let go and already brought back as well. Someone who, of course, made a difference for them, was a key linchpin for them in the secondary this year. But Swift, they brought him in. He had a really productive year, and then they let him walk again. He's with the Bears now. Obviously, some of the big moves, the guys they brought in, Saquon Barkley, Zach Bond, Mekhi Becton, they were all obviously enormous for the Super Bowl run. Obviously, Isaiah Rodgers, everybody around here with the Colts is very familiar with that. I'd already mentioned DeAndre Swift. Kevin Byard was someone who was there for a little bit. So this is all just within the last couple of years. They're willing to be very fluid with the roster and make improvements and keep it so it's not complacent. It's just not stagnant water there. That creek is always moving. There's always new, exciting, productive things coming down the pipe for them. And I think you have to be willing to get uncomfortable and hurt feelings and things like that and bring in the right players. They're active in the trade market. Howie Roseman is very active when it comes to trades. DeAndre Swift was someone they had involved. Kevin Byard as well. Like I mentioned, Kenny Pickett, Jahan Dotson, their slot receiver, had nearly what was the first touchdown of the day last night. But it was rolled down at like the 1 yard line. So difference maker there. They traded away Hassan Reddick. They move around a lot of draft picks for these guys. And they're also not afraid to include small time players in these. But Chris Ballard is someone who is willing to trade, but like it's probably not at the level of Howie Roseman, someone who sees something he wants to do and does it. He doesn't let, all this red tape get in his way or like hard, stubborn lines get in his way. He makes moves. In the draft, hitting on your early round draft picks is enormous because, as we've seen, Ballard and his group are awesome when it comes to finding mid and late round players, but the roster is just full of nice stories like that, like guys who overachieved as mid or late round picks. They don't hit on their early round picks all that much. Like some of them are good players. You look like Kwity Paye and guys like that, but they're not like huge difference makers. And positional value not positional value, but need necessarily doesn't always come into play. And when it does, it's okay because they use free agency to make it to where draft picks don't have to be hits right away. We've seen that the Eagles are very good at planning ahead. Guys like Milton Williams and Cam Jurgens and Nolan Smith, they weren't necessarily immediate needs, but they needed them to contribute within a year or so. And then by the time they were ready to contribute, they were really good players. They didn't need to be difference makers right away. But Milton Williams is about to get a freaking bag in free agency. Nolan Smith really blew up in this season. Look at the postseason he just had. Cam Jurgens had to replace Jason Kelce. And none of them were guys who had to be splashes right away. You could draft guys and they can sit and develop. Just use free agency to make it so the needs are not so dire. And then you look at the draft picks they've had in those early rounds. Jalen Carter, first rounder. Nolan Smith, first rounder. Quinyon Mitchell, first rounder. Cooper DeJean, second round. Jalix Hunt, third. They're getting a lot of these guys who, some of them, obviously, Jalen Carter is a freak in nature and can contribute immediately. Mitchell and Cooper DeJean as well. But they're hitting on these early round picks. I think they have the right idea, the Colts do, with athleticism. Of course, it's great. But I think a track record in college and a pedigree matters. Like, look at the Eagles. They're loaded with, like, proven collegiate talent from, like, the SEC and Georgia specifically. You're getting a lot of guys who aren't mysterious. You're drafting them and you figure these are going to be really good players. I don't want this to seem like any sort of like subtweet like Laiatu Latu, for instance. I do think he's going to be a good player. And honestly, the Latu pick, I think, is very well thought of, like how the Eagles would have done this thing, because they didn't necessarily need edge help right away. But you look at all the other stuff the Colts have done in early rounds, and it's just been whelming at best for the most part. They're getting okay players, but not big time players. And so, I think if you kind of change the way you do things a little bit, it's not just going to magically happen overnight. And again, this is a process. This is something Howie Roseman and the Eagles do year after year after year, and they built it to be able to withstand changes each season. So, they're not going to build Rome in a day, but these are things that they can start doing right now. It's not too late. We're in the off season right now. Start doing these things to build a better foundation to get over the hump and not just be a 500 team, an 8-9 team. You can start getting back on the right track, wild card, win the division. You got to start somewhere. And then obviously something the Colts are already very well aware of, build through the trenches. The Eagles have Jeff Stoutland coaching their offensive line. So that's one thing. Those guys don't grow on trees, but I do think the Colts are already in the right direction. Like Tony Sperano Jr., I think, is a very good offensive line coach. He's a guy who brought the Colts offensive line back to their dominant form. They rolled with the punches with all the injuries they were dealt with, but I think it's safe to say the Colts are on the right track with their coaching. But just keep an eye on the trenches and make the right picks. That is so important. Again, Chris Ballard, I think he's on the right track when it comes to building through the trenches, but getting your right draft picks certainly matters. And again, use free agency to supplement your roster so that guys don't have to be splashes right away. So off the soapbox for now, we're going to go talk about specifically the offensive side of the ball here in just a moment. As a small business owner, your work does not end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means it's time to hire. You need a partner that works just as hard as you do. And that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn, they clock right in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Just post your job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip from them. If you add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture, you can double your reach to qualified candidates. It's no wonder that 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so let's look at the Eagles offensively real quick. If you didn't watch the Super Bowl, they didn't necessarily use the same recipe that had been working all year. The Chiefs are a good run defense and obviously knew that the Eagles were going to want to use Saquon Barkley to dominate. Now, what happened with Saquon Barkley this year, number one, you're running behind an elite offensive line coached by an elite coach in Jeff Stoutland. So again, not every team is going to be able to replicate that. That's so much easier said than done. But the Colts have already done a nice job of creating that offensive line core that's going to be really necessary to move forward and start a new chapter where they remain at an elite level, but this is going to be an important offseason because obviously Ryan Kelly is a free agent. Will Fries is a free agent. Braden Smith, we don't really know what's going on there. So you've got the coaching. You've still got, Bernard Ryman and Quentin Nelson. Some recent draft picks like Matt Gonzalez and Tanner Bortolini are going to help, but you're going to have more depth there. So this is going to be really important to see how the Colts attack it. But yeah, you look at what the Eagles were able to do. Just looking at like Pro Football Focus grades, for example, just at least gives you a general idea of where the Eagles are really, really good and kind of top of the class. Their grade in the run game was a 90.2 this year, which is a super elite grade, but it actually is only tied for the 9th best in the league. And they had one of the best rushing performances of all time from Saquon Barkley this year. So that's pretty attainable. You've got Jonathan Taylor. That's great. That's a great start. Still in his prime, probably getting towards the latter part of his prime, but nonetheless, it's a guy that just finished 4th in the league in rushing. So you've got a quarterback who is of the same mobile skill set as Jalen Hurts. Now, Jalen Hurts does get dinged up a bit and misses some games occasionally, not to the level of Anthony Richardson, but you've got Anthony Richardson. That's a plus. You got him teamed up with Jonathan Taylor. That's a great start. It's not necessarily Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley, obviously, but if you can get that elite offensive line really flowing and built up like it should be. Injuries have been a huge problem there. Obviously for the offensive line, guys have been missing time left and right. Anthony Richardson's missed time left and right. Even Jonathan Taylor has. So injuries are a huge but all you can do is construct these levels properly. So O-line, O-line, O-line. Again, it doesn't have to be right away. It doesn't have to be first, second round, but just keep investing decent picks, third, fourth, fifth round picks each year in these guys. You may have to use free agency sometimes, but O-line has always got to be critical. Like we mentioned, Cam Jurgens taking over for Jason Kelce. It was seamless. It worked for the Eagles. As far as quarterback goes, you got to plan for Anthony Richardson to miss a little time during the year. So your backup quarterback has got to be someone who's suitable enough to provide competition to Richardson, because as we all know, Anthony Richardson has not earned the right to be like the face of the franchise yet. He's had the injury problems and got benched for a couple of games last year. Let's be real about it. But this backup quarterback has got to be able to provide competition, but he's also going to have to be a guy who's got some sort of mobility. I get what the Colts were doing with Joe Flacco last year. He was coming off the heels of the Comeback Player of the Year award the year before with the Browns. Looked like a quality backup, could maybe teach Richardson a thing or two. But stylistically, these dudes were not similar. Joe Flacco is just kind of a gunslinger at this point with no mobility. And that's just not what Anthony Richardson is right now. It's a guy that can escape sacks with the best of them, can run with the best of them, and has got a really strong arm, but struggles with consistency of all the little things. So your backup quarterback is going to have to be somewhat similar to your starter. We've been saying this for a long time, and it's just not really been the case, but you got to do something to figure it out. I know Justin Fields is going to be an expensive guy, but if that's the avenue you want to go, that's someone who could start if Richardson gets hurt. And it's someone who I think could really push him as a player. And Shane Steichen could surely do a couple nice things with Justin Fields if he has to play. So get someone who's somewhat like Anthony Richardson. That also keeps that power run game really working, and it makes it dynamic as well. So again, you've got Anthony Richardson. That's good. Jonathan Taylor, again, he's the 2021 rushing champ. He finished fourth this year in rushing. Among all active NFL running backs right now, he's actually number one in career yards per carry per game among Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, all these guys. So you've got the horses, so to speak. Just keep investing in offensive line play. You know, when it comes to the passing game as well, obviously you can't just have a non-existent passing game. The Colts are not going to be able to replicate A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith right now, but they've got Dallas Goedert as well. Jahan Dotson is a nice piece. You know, Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce is a nice start. They're not Brown and Smith, but I think that's okay. You know, they've got Josh Downs, which not every team has, but adding a real tight end to the mix, I think, could take them to another level. Tyler Warren in the draft obviously would be huge, but if you could get like a Mike Gesicki or Jawan Johnson in free agency, a pass-catching tight end who, again, doesn't put so much pressure on you having to nail the rookie tight end pick. The tight end, which is that's one of the longer developing positions to really acclimate to the NFL. Buy yourself some time. Get a proven pass-catching tight end just to like help get some sort of consistency in your passing game, which there has not been in years now, it seems. But these aren't, again, they're not going to be done at the level that Philadelphia has been doing them, but there are things that can certainly help move it in the right direction. Continue with the O-line. Try to not make any huge blunders with how you handle this free agent class, because you got guys who are going to be going out. Continue to invest in these young guys. Quarterback is going to be important. Get Jonathan Taylor some suitable help as well. Trey Sermon's a free agent, but him and Tyler Goodson, that was not cutting it. Jonathan Taylor accounted for over 80% of the offensive snaps when he was healthy. That's too much. You got to have someone who is capable of helping. You cannot be a stick in the mud on this one. You got to understand that some of these guys are going to run down. And when they need to come off the field, those can't just be punts, essentially. You got to be able to bring something to the table when your biggest playmakers leave the field. And that extends to defense too, which we're actually going to talk about here in just a moment. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on all that action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or win a bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets in the same game parlay. I personally love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I miss my chance. Plus, the app's super easy to use, very user-friendly. And when you win, you get paid instantly. You don't have to wait forever to get your money. You won it, you earned it, so you ought to get it quickly, right? So right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, guys, so we just watched, again, one of the best defensive performances we have seen in a Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes isn't always Superman, but he is, at minimum, when he's not having his strongest game, he makes the big plays when they need to be made. And for my money, I don't know that I've ever seen him play worse and make worse decisions and be under more duress than he was against the Eagles in that Super Bowl. And you look at a couple big things the Eagles do well. They did it all season, and they did it in this game against the Super Bowl. Their PFF grade for pass rush was a 90. That was second best in the NFL, only to the Steelers. And in coverage, their 93.9 was comfortably first. And you look at what they've done. They feed that pass rush year after year. They already had Josh Sweat. They had Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith. They reinvested. They keep bringing in all these guys. And in coverage, their first two picks were Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean this year, and they brought back C.J. Gardner-Johnson. So they reinvested in that secondary. They kept feeding the pass rush, and then a good move they made to supplement the middle of the defense was bringing in Zach Bond from the Saints, who had one of the better linebacker years we've seen in a while. Like, you look at what Fred Warner has done and, with the 49ers stuff that, Roquan Smith has done in the past few years. I think you throw Zach Bond season he just had in with the Eagles right in there with the stuff that those guys had been doing, what Shaquille Leonard had been doing in his prime with the Colts. Zach Bond just had a monster season and was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate legitimately. And we saw why in the Super Bowl. He had a pick. Earlier in the playoffs, he had a key forced fumble. Like, this guy was all over the place. He's a free agent. If the Colts want to throw a ton of money at him, Zach Bond is a free agent. So they could certainly do that. But no, the Eagles showed us there is never too much investment in the defensive line. The Eagles were relentless against Mahomes. And I think, the last time I saw the stat in the game, they hadn't blitzed yet. They were getting home with 4 all game long. They were terrorizing Kansas City's offensive line. And that was an offensive line with some good players on it. Trey Smith, Joe Thuney, like those guys aren't anything to sniff at. So if you're looking what the Colts need, I think their starting 4 is fine. It's okay, but they've got to have more juice for depth. And if it results in different starters, then it results in different starters. DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart, I think that's guys you feel comfortable saying should remain where they're at. But Kwity Paye and Laiatu Latu and, Tyquan Lewis, like, those are nice players. But you got Dayo Dangbo, who's a free agent. Samson Ebukam is coming back from an Achilles. There's nothing about that group that says you need to remain status quo and run it back. If I'm the Colts, I'm thinking you got to throw a bunch of resources at this defensive line again this year. And that involves getting real backups on the interior. And I don't even want to call them backups. I think it ought to be a rotation. DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart are both going to be 31 this season. And, they're close to the twilight of their careers. These aren't guys who are probably going to have like 5 more Pro Bowl level years in them. if you get another, like Milton Williams, I think has probably priced himself out at this point. But if you invest early in a defensive lineman, which this is a huge draft for it, like just an example, Walter Nolan is someone you guys have heard me talk about a lot about lately. You throw Walter Nolan into the mix early. Number one, that checks the box if he doesn't have to be a huge contributor right away. He has time to develop because you have Buckner and Stewart, but there's going to be enough snaps available to where he can get those live reps, because Taven Bryan is a free agent, and for all intents and purposes, why would he come back? Raekwon Davis, if you cut him, you create a lot of salary cap space. So he is someone who maybe now won't be back either. So you look at that on the edges, you got to think Latu is going to take another step forward. If he can finish some of those pressures he had and turn them into sacks, I think he'll have a good looking resume this year. Kwity Paye, he's going to be going into that final year, but he's never been much more than just a really solid edge player. Good against the run, is going to give you about 6 to 8 sacks per year, but you obviously need more there. So whatever resources the Colts want to pour into the defensive line this year, I do it. I think they really need to. In the middle of the defense at linebacker, I think they need more range, violence, and just overall playmakers. If you looked at that Super Bowl win over the Chiefs, the whole team was flying around. The whole defense was flying around and swarming to the ball. But you look at the linebackers, and like a Zach Bond is just everywhere all the time. So Zaire Franklin, that's probably not changing at all. I know people have their opinions about Zaire Franklin. He's probably going to be the starting Mike again. But you have a real opportunity to see what you can do at those other two linebacker spots. So Jalen Carlisle could be a nice little player for them, but he definitely needs competition. Franklin needs competition. But you also have an opportunity to create kind of a special role at Sam linebacker. It doesn't have to be a thing where you just like plop a regular backup, Grant Stewart or Cameron McGrone type player in there. You could get a really nice defensive player and put him in there and have a special role for them where they're a dynamic player, and it's not just base defense. We need an extra guy out there to play the run. Like, you could do something interesting there. So you bring in another linebacker, and maybe you see an increase in snaps there, and it's still in sub packages. Like, they're with Lou Anarumo as the defensive coordinator, I feel like the defense isn't going to be so boring and static as it was before. So maybe their thought process expands a little bit there with the creativity they could do with the defense. But we'll see. And then in the secondary, obviously you saw they invested early in cornerbacks. I think that is a group the Colts are still going to have to do. Jalen Jones, Samuel Womack, that's nice. Kenny Moore, obviously, I think is still an elite slot defender, but he's getting older as well. Juju Brents at this point is he's kind of a bonus player. Whatever else you get from him, that's nice, but you cannot count on him. He's not been 100% at any point since he's been with the Colts. So really nice player when he's out there, but at this point you cannot count on him being out there. So if they again want to throw another couple cornerbacks into the mix, you might do it. I think they clearly were not satisfied with what they wanted last year, and the proof was in what they drafted. They drafted Micah Abraham and Jalen Simpson as well. Those guys aren't still with the team, but they drafted them to be players on that team. So I think the Colts are still going to go out for cornerbacks, and they might do it early. And then we already knew this with Lou Anarumo and the new defense, but you're going to need a smart, instinctive safety. CJ Gardner-Johnson, for example, they have him and Reed Blankenship, but like Gardner-Johnson is not the type of guy that's going to be the workout warrior. But I go back to when I was watching him coming out of Florida, and he was one of my absolute favorite safeties I've ever watched prior to a draft, because he was so smart, had such good instincts, and he just seemed like he was playing chess out there while the other guys were playing checkers. And I do think that's one area where the Colts struggle to draft safety help, is they're probably too reliant on those athletic thresholds. You get a safety who just knows what he's doing, is going to be in the right spots. That makes such a big difference. And so I think safety is going to be really important, specifically free safety, because I like what you got going to Nick Cross. I think that's moving in the right direction. But your single high safety, I think, is going to have to be a super instinctive player, and that's going to make a big difference. You get that, and then you continue to invest somewhat early picks and cornerbacks, and I think that'll make a big difference. Again, Rome was not built in a day. The Colts are obviously not going to duplicate what the Eagles did anytime soon. But you look at what the Eagles did, and they don't really have any clear weaknesses. You can use them as a nice blueprint of like how you might want to move forward, because how do you beat that Eagles team? You shut down Saquon Barkley, and then you've got AJ Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert going over your head, and then defensively, it's a relentless pass rush. They can stop the run a bit, and then they have a really nice young secondary. So invest in those picks. Really hit on your early draft picks is so incredibly important, as we've seen, and I think you'll be moving in the right direction. So thanks for listening to me talk today, guys. I was really pumped to get to talk to you guys about this one. I don't know about you, but it does I know a lot of people are down on the direction of the Colts and everything, but look at the Super Bowl. Let it excite you for what you hope the Colts can do in the offseason. After all, there's no more football now, so that's all we have right now is hope that the teams we follow and cover do the right things and do exciting things to move in the right direction. So let me know what you guys think, what you think the Colts could do based on what you just saw the Eagles do against the Chiefs. And that's all we got for you guys today. Thanks again for making us your first listen of the day. Now go find Locked On NFL. It's twice a day, and first, the madman Tyler Rowland is going to kick off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you guys want to become a Locked On Colts insider and chat with us directly, ask us your questions, get the inside scoop, follow the link in our show notes. If you don't already, please follow at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. We're also on TikTok and Instagram as well. Also, please be sure to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. Ratings and reviews are very much appreciated as well. And with that, we will see you guys later this week. We got a big week ahead that we're pumped about.